Well, hello again, everyone. Once more, I have the privilege of spending some time with one of the artists from our For All Our Sisters project, which through music, poetry, and dance shines the light on the power of women's voices that have often been misunderstood, misinterpreted, and silenced throughout history and into the present day. I'm happy to be joined today by Nathan Whittaker, a cellist who is a concert soloist, chamber musician, historical cello specialist, and teacher who has performed for multiple early music groups and festivals here in Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, and throughout the country. He also is the artistic director of gallery concerts. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Nathan.
Oh, it's great to be here. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. So tell me more, before we dive into talking about the For All Our Sisters project, I would like to take a little bit of time to have you share the story about how you came to be a musician, and particularly a cellist. So tell me more about how you discovered your passion for music, and particularly for the cello, and how did this journey begin?
Well, for me, it was actually a journey that started quite a long time ago, being that both my parents are musicians. So I started piano when I was 3 years old, and I was really very much bred to be a musician. I'm pretty much convinced. I started cello when I was in third grade, and through various decisions that we all make in our life, decided that I really can't live without being a cellist, and I decided to go for it many years ago, and it's been a very it's been a nice choice. I started doing early music in college, actually, with Stanley Ritchie at Indiana University, who was spent many years in Seattle himself, and is still a great mentor to me.
Mm-hmm. And so you have quite a colorful early music career and have played with so many wonderful groups here in the Pacific Northwest and throughout the country, including our Seattle Baroque Orchestra. So how were you introduced to early music Seattle and SBO in the first place?
Well, it was actually through Stanley Ritchie, who was among his other students is Ingrid Matthews, so he wrote to Ingrid when I moved to Seattle in 2006, and wrote something. I have no idea what he wrote, but apparently it was good enough. So she said, "Hey, Nathan, why don't you come and play with us?" And I guess the rest was kind of history. So I've been really lucky to be playing with Seattle Baroque Orchestra for the last, 14 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. I didn't realize it was that long. Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So in this latest Early Music Seattle project, For All Our Sisters, you perform a piece by a lesser known woman composer, Imogen Holst, called The Fall of the Leaf. What led you to choose this piece of music, and how does it reflect the theme this project represents?
Yeah, so sadly, when this pandemic struck us all, it's the last few months have been quite an emotional roller coaster for all of us, and when this project had to sort of move from an in-person event to a virtual one. Gus wrote to me and asked if there was anything that I could do, and we kind of wrote back and forth and said, well, there's not a whole lot of music for the cello by 18th century women, because there just weren't many female composers back then in the first place, much less composers that wrote for the cello. But as luck has it, I was aware of this piece by Imogen Holst. Imogen Holst was the daughter of Gustav Holst, but she was quite a force unto herself, and also a champion of early music. In her life, she ran the Purcell Singers in England, but also wrote many volumes on Purcell and William Byrd, and even on Bach. So she was a composer who looked back at the music of the past and then allowed that to inform her own compositions. So in that way, it was a good match for this project, in that the idea of this project is how can we incorporate women's voices, and not make them something that is on the outside, but is really just a part of it's something that's not an oddity, but rather something that's just normal. And this was a way that I could at least contribute something to the project in quarantine, because she had her own idea of how to reinvent an old tune. So The Fall of the Leaf is a piece found in the Fitzwilliam Virginal book from about 1610. This one was added, and she took this tune and essentially wrote a series of variations into a suite for unaccompanied cello, where it starts off with the theme, and then there are three movements that follow it, and then it returns to the theme, and the return is the music is very much transformed, even though it's the exact same theme. It's a really incredible composition in that way. So I think it was, even though it's not early music at all, it takes early music and puts that new spin that I think our world is craving for at this time.
Absolutely. So in the video you produced for this project, you touch on how women in Imogen's time and even today are held back by what you call a systematic lack of opportunity, support, and education, and the presence of misogyny. In the music world, how has this played out historically? And in your opinion and experience, what are the barriers that women face today on their path to becoming successful musicians and composers?
Well, I can certainly speak historically, that for most of what we call the common practice period of music, which is essentially from the Baroque period to the end of the 20th century, or to the beginning of the 20th century, it was, as a general rule, considered just inappropriate for a female to become a musician. And there are some examples of some women who, I don't even want to say the word persevered through it, but I don't think can't come up with something better at the time. But if we look at a composer like Barbara Strozzi, for example, who was called all sorts of horrible things, and simply because she was a composer and an artist. And we can even look at the Mendelssohn family. So Felix Mendelssohn, of course, we're very familiar with him and his music, but Fanny Mendelssohn, his sister, was considered by many to be the superior composer of the two of them. But in a letter from their father, a famous letter, Felix and Fanny's father writes to Fanny that Felix is destined to be a musician, but you are not allowed to be one. So, there's just very real and obvious barriers to how women were allowed or just not allowed because of what was considered proper or improper. And thankfully over the centuries, things have gradually started to erode, and some of these barriers are lessened. However, when we look around at the composers of today, it's still a very much male-dominated field, and it's not just composers. Especially, the most striking example is in the field of conducting. If you look around at the conductors of the not even the major symphony orchestras, almost any symphony orchestra, men dominate the field in a way that is too bad. And I hope that going forward, we'll be able to find a way to create a community of musicians and community of artists that actually represent the people of who we are in 2020, as opposed to what people thought the community and the voices should be at some point in the past. Because art is really the manifestation, representation, not of only who we are, but of who we want to be as humans in this society. And when we exclude voices for any reason, it lessens all of us.
So other than bringing more of the work of female composers into the light of day, which you mentioned in your video, and performing their music, what are the changes that you see need to be made in order for women to equally share the spotlight and concert stage with men?
Oh, great question. You know, that's such a, I wish I had a crystal ball and could just say, here are the, if we do these steps, A, B, C, D, E, this will be fixed. And
You don't have one hiding somewhere?
I
there
don't have one. I forgot to add it to cart last week. So it didn't arrive in the mail. You know, there's lots of people who make this their life work of figuring out how can we really create an equitable society. And that just doesn't mean just you know, in terms of voting rights or anything like that, but in terms of artistic expression and freedom of expression. And I suppose the first step that men, especially white men like me, should make is by actually championing the work of others, of female composers, of people of color, and also taking a step back in certain ways so that their voice can come through, because there's only so much oxygen in the room, and we need to give more space to the voices that we haven't heard, so that everyone can breathe a little bit better.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. So who are the women composers and musicians that inspire you the most, and how have they influenced your life?
Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, just when we start thinking about composers, you know, like we already talked about Fanny Mendelssohn. Her music is spectacular. Her string quartet is an absolutely under appreciated masterpiece. But if we think of, especially when we're talking about 17th century music, with the music of Barbara Strozzi, the poetry and the way she sets it is I don't have the words to really describe how poignant it is. But also, you know, when we're talking about other women, I mean, I could point to some of the musicians I've played with that I really admire, like Ingrid Matthews. But I hope we get to a point where it's almost not a question of how does this specific voice influence you, because it's just part of who we are as an artistic community.
Right, right. So what do you hope are the main takeaways that people will leave with once they view all of the creative performances and offerings that make up this project?
Well, I mean, the central premise of the project, of the re-examining of old stories and looking at them through different perspectives is I mean, that's the whole ball of wax. That's the whole ball game, right? That we have in our society, we've built certain stories and ideas and ways of thought based off of traditions. Some traditions being good, some traditions being there just to hold up certain standards that someone at some point liked for either a good or a nefarious reason, that are just no longer needed. I hope that we can move forward to start questioning why things have to be the way that they are, and um, and then take the next step and actually do something about it, right? It's nice to have a thought experiment often of, what would have changed, but then let's actually go the next step and actually change it. Let's do something. And I think it hopefully this project and so many things that are happening in the world right now encourage us all to figure out, how do I take what I do well, what I do the best, and how can I um, put it in a lens that actually uh, makes it the most beneficial for society, for helping uh, create more equity in women in music, or people of color in society, or LGBTQ rights, anything, whatever it might be, that we can all find, because everyone has some gift. I'm lucky that I have an affinity for music. I certainly don't have an affinity for other languages. I can't speak other languages very well. But so, but other people may have an affinity for language, or they may have an affinity for writing, or organization, or whatever it might be. And we all take the gifts that we have, develop them in the best possible ways that we can, and then use them in a way um, that just moves us all, not just forward, but moves us better.
Yeah. So before we sign off, Nathan, what are some of the current artistic endeavors that you're engaged in and how can people find out more about you?
Sure. Well, I'm the artistic director of gallery concerts, and I would encourage everyone to go to galleryconcerts.org to see about our organization. We have a series of both Baroque and classical concerts, all on period instruments, that takes place here in Seattle. You're also welcome to, of course, visit my luxurious home on the web, nathanhwhittaker.com, where you can see a few videos that I've done, as some CDs that, if you have a CD player still at home, you're welcome to get some of those, and see what concerts you could have come to if there wasn't a pandemic. But what I think so many of us are trying to do at this time is to figure out, how do we continue to be creative in the time of COVID. And that's certainly something that my wife and I are working on a daily basis. We discussing this with some of my colleagues. We as musicians have to be more creative than we've ever been in the past, because the normal ways of doing things, some of it may come back, but it's never going to be the same. And it breaks my heart to say that, but it's not. So we're going to have to really blaze new paths and really be creative and throw a lot of stuff up at the wall and see what sticks and see what doesn't. And that's really what this is. The way that I'm viewing this time of COVID is a time of, it's an opportunity to try new things. It's a gift of experimentation. And that's, so to answer your question, what's coming up, I don't know. And that's thrilling. We're going to see what comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And we all are having to sort of band together and bring our creative talents, more and more in collaboration. And I think that's the gift that offers is really, it does give us an opportunity to do things differently. And it just opens up so much possibility. And I think this project is just one example of that. Just bringing people together around something that's so compelling and a theme that I think is so applicable to what's going on as far as people finding their voices right now. And
Absolutely.
so it's been wonderful to have you be part of this, and we look forward to when we can once again see you in person in the concert hall. But until then, you know, we'll look forward to doing projects like this with you, and it's just wonderful that you were able to be part of this with Early Music Seattle, Nathan. And so thank you for
Well,
the gifts that you offered to it.
oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.